Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. I think it's time for us to take kind of an overview of what's been going on in the world of international affairs for people who are concerned about peace. And I happen to belong to the Canadian Pugwash Group, which is part of the international conferences, Pugwash conferences on international affairs. I don't know, I can't say the whole title, but it's a big outfit. Been going on a long time, and it won a Nobel Prize many years ago for its good effects during the Cold War. I'd like to say that we are having such good effects these days, but it's kind of hard to find triumphs to brag about. Anyway, I have two friends that I've known a long time from the Pugwash movement, and one of them is Tariq Rauf, who is based in Vienna, and he's going to help me get caught up with what I've been missing at the UN and some of these other meetings. That he's much more in contact with people than I am. And here in Canada, just a hop, skip, and jump down the road to Ottawa is my friend Robin Collins. And Robin is, I think, still the secretary of the Canadian Pugwash Group. He's the most generous man with his time for peace work that I've ever known. I mean, you could just snap your fingers, and here comes Robin, ready to do whatever you need to have done. So,
Yes,
welcome to both of you. And I want to start off, if I may,
certainly.
with inviting Tariq to tell me what I've missed, because I know that every year the UN has its General Assembly, and this year I don't think I heard two words about it. Nobody mentioned anything going on there, but from your perch in Vienna, where I know you're connected with nuclear issues, especially, but other things too, you are better situated to bring us up to date than anybody else. So, Tariq, bring me up to date.
Okay, well, hello, Mecca and Robin. So, as Mecca mentioned, the General Assembly of the United Nations meets in October and November. Before that, there are six committees of the General Assembly. The first committee deals with nuclear and other disarmament and arms control issues. So, I tend to follow the first committee. And normally, every year, there are about 50 to 60 resolutions on a variety of issues such as Iran, the Middle East, North Korea, conventional weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, ballistic missiles, nuclear weapon free zones, transparency in armaments, military expenditures, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, fissile material cutoff treaty, zone free of nuclear and weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, and so on. So this year, as usual, the debates were quite controversial and fractious, in a sense, reflecting the general deterioration of relations between the United States on the one hand and Russia and China on the other hand, and overall deterioration between East-West relations, particularly given over the war, continuing war in Ukraine, but also in Gaza as well. So there's only one treaty left standing between Moscow and Washington. This is the New START Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty that will expire on the 5th of February next year. So the
Oh, didn't
Russians,
they decide to keep it going?
no. So I was about to explain that the Russians have offered to maintain the numerical limits of this treaty, and I will explain those in a minute. But all other provisions of the New START are still suspended.
Oh.
So no exchanges of data, no exchanges of verification on site in each of the two countries by the other side, and so on. So the numerical limits are 1,550 nuclear warheads that are ready to go. We call them deployed nuclear warheads, which are mounted on land-based intercontinental ballistic
Hold
missiles.
on. Is that the 1,500 something Russian, or is that the total for the world?
No, that is 1,550 nuclear warheads each
Each. Okay.
that are operationally deployed. Each of them also have roughly about 3,000 other warheads in storage. So between the two of them, they have somewhere around 10, 11,000 warheads.
Mhm.
Overall, among the 9 countries that have nuclear weapons, we have about 12,300 warheads. So about 2,000 of these are ready to go at the press of a button.
Mm.
So coming back to the New START treaty, the numbers are that each side will deploy no more than 1,550 nuclear warheads deployed on 700 delivery systems. So these are land-based intercontinental missiles, submarine-launched intercontinental missiles, and long-range bombers. And they can have 100 additional delivery systems that are not operationally deployed but are available to them. So thus far, Washington has not responded positively to the Russian offer, although the media says that President Trump has sort of welcomed it informally, but officially there has not been any response from Washington to Moscow that yes, we are willing to abide by these limits for one more year until February 2027.
Can he on his own say yes, or does I mean this a treaty has to be approved by the Senate, but
No,
for a new treaty or an extension, does that have to be approved also by Congress?
no. So the treaty was signed by Obama in 2010 for an initial period of 5 years, and it was extended 10 years rather, and it was extended for another 5 years without going to Congress or the Russian Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
And the two presidents can decide by themselves through an exchange of notes or even verbal messages that each side will continue to abide by these numbers that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a number of think tank people in Washington are advising President Trump that he should not go for an extension of these numbers because, in their view, the Russians have deployed new systems, including this so-called nuclear-powered cruise missile. They have another missile called the Poseidon that can, in a sense, circle around the Earth, and other new weapons, and they feel that this would give Russia an advantage. But
Excuse me, but now this Poseidon, I don't know the name of what he is referring to, but I understand that Putin was making a lot of bragging remarks about how they have I think a submarine, I mean, an underwater missile that could detonate on on the east coast of the U.S. and create a tsunami, radioactive tsunami that would bury the entire U.S. cities.
yes, so there have been unfortunate statements out of Moscow regarding these systems about laying waste the United Kingdom and or the United States if things go bad.
Mm-hmm.
So, but generally in the arms control community, there's a feeling that the numbers should be maintained and the two sides should get back to the negotiating table, but that is not on the cards. I'll pass over to Robin.
Well, Tariq, I was going to ask you a question because you've commented on this before, you very usefully. In fact, very few people I think have, which is, at the height of the Cold War, there were 60,000 combined nuclear weapons or on missiles and otherwise, I guess, in the available for use by the nuclear powers. And then post Cold War, there were reductions, and some of the fissile material was burned in power plants and so on. But you have pointed out that the actual fissile material that is still available somewhere, that it hasn't been lost, um, raises those numbers from the 12,000 or the 6,000, depending on whichever numbers we're using, quite a bit further up. And I wonder if you could say something more about that. I mean, I guess it depends on the size of the nuclear weapon we would be talking about, back at the peak of 60,000 versus, what they are on average now. But I mean, ballpark, what are we actually talking about in terms of capabilities potentially?
So what Robin is referring to is weapon usability nuclear material. So for nuclear weapons, we need two types of material. One is highly enriched uranium, which is enriched to somewhere around 90%, 90, and also plutonium. So I worked at the IAEA working on nuclear verification, and at the IAEA for verification purposes, it regards 25 kilograms or less of highly enriched uranium as being sufficient for one nuclear weapon, roughly of the size of Hiroshima bomb, of about 10,000 kilotons, 10,000 tons of conventional explosives, and roughly 8 kilograms of plutonium. So in the stockpiles of the nuclear weapon states, 90% of this material is between Russia and the United States. We have roughly 1,500 metric tons of highly enriched uranium. A metric ton is 1,000 kilograms. So 1,500 metric tons is 1,500,000 kilograms. And for plutonium, we have roughly 500 metric tons. So 5 million kilograms. So in all, we have somewhere around enough nuclear material for 60,000 nuclear weapons, were all of this material to be made into nuclear weapons. But that is not going to happen. The bigger danger is, as I mentioned, although under the New START, each side can have and has 1,550 nuclear warheads, but they have about 3,000 each in storages. So many of these weapons can be brought back and put back on existing missiles in order to maintain the limitations of New START. They reduce the number of warheads per land-based missile and per sea-based missile. So they can put those warheads back without making any new missiles and nearly double the number of nuclear warheads available for ready use. Now, in the last few weeks, there has been a movie on this channel called Netflix called House of Dynamite, which shows that a ballistic missile launched from somewhere that the United States cannot determine from where, one single missile is headed for the United States. They try to shoot it down, but the interceptors miss. So the rest of the movie is shown to decide the pressures on the American president and how to respond. So his advisors have given all the options that the advisors have given him, all involve the use of nuclear weapons in retaliation. He is not given the option of waiting to see whether this thing will actually detonate, whether it has a nuclear warhead or not, figure out where this missile has come from, and then retaliate. So in a sense, this is part of the weakness of the scenario, but I think what the movie is trying to show is that between Washington and Moscow, they have 20 minutes or less to make up their mind whether their warning systems are telling them that they are under attack. This could be a mistake by the computers or the radars or so on. And between India and Pakistan, the warning time is 3 or 4 minutes. The Americans keep a ballistic missile submarine in the high Arctic, whose missiles can reach Moscow in under 10 minutes. The Russians so far do not permanently keep a ballistic missile submarine off the coast of Florida, but they could. And then there are also American submarines off the coast in Vladivostok, in the North Pacific, in the Sea of Okhotsk. So we are in very dangerous times. And just yesterday, there was a report out of Brussels that an American strategic bomber, a B-52 bomber, is doing, this carries nuclear weapons in wartime, not in peacetime, is doing war drills very close to the borders of Russia. So we have this tension ratcheting up in Europe, and if long-range cruise missiles, so-called Tomahawks that people may have heard in the news, are provided to Ukraine and it starts attacking strategic air bases in Russia, we really don't know where the situation will end up. And nobody at the moment is preaching restraint. Even the media is, in my view, egging on policymakers and the public to ratchet up the war.
I don't know if you've seen the film Meta yet on
No, I
Netflix.
haven't.
No, it's really worth seeing. I mean, it shows as Tariq mentioned, there's a 20-minute window. And the movie's longer than 60 minutes. It's an hour and a half or so, but it shows the same scenario from three different perspectives, and it repeats the scenario from basically beginning to end, 20 minutes, three times, or repeats it twice, I guess.
Uh,
And so you get a real in-house feeling as to the uncertainties involved and the risks and the presumptions. I mean, one of the suggestions made was that it could have been launched by an American source because in the film, the detection equipment goes down at the early minutes, so they know it's coming from the Pacific, but they don't know if it's coming actually from. It could be from an American submarine, or no, I guess it wouldn't be a. I don't know. I guess a sub could launch interballistic missile, intercontinental. Yeah, so it could even be an American missile that's been false. Exactly,
accidentally.
exactly. So a number of the scenarios are right there,
Mm,
and the decision making, you have a lot of sympathy for the decision making scenario of the president of the U.S. who has to make do we hit them now so they can't launch more? Whether that's a sensible argument, but that's one of the ones that they're pursuing.
Now
It's quite interesting.
you mentioned three different versions of the same story. Is this from one side from the American point of view, one side
No,
from
all American point of view.
why did they
But
do it
so
three?
one is the president. Oh, gee, I remember Tariq can help me with this. One's the president. One is in the White House, emergency, uh, strategic brain center, and I can't even remember what the third one is now. Whether it was a family member of one of those involved, but they're all kind of interrelated,
Mhm,
but they have slightly different perspectives. It's a very good film of from our point of view. I think it
mhm.
will. It doesn't raise all the issues, and I won't give away the how it ends, but it raises enough of them to concern people. I hope a lot of people watch this that are
I
watching
want
this.
to watch it. I haven't.
Yeah.
But now my impression is that although geopolitical tensions right now are more uh, tense than 2 years ago or so, that the actual numbers and the actual strategic situation is not any different. That what Tariq has described has been more or less the case for many years, uh, with the exception that maybe they're adding new technologies. I mean, the Russians, we know, are bragging about adding some new weaponry, and I presume the U.S. is doing the same, but not bragging. But otherwise, this is not news, is it? In terms of the uncertainty built into the way the weapons are now deployed.
I think one thing that's different, and it varies over time. I mean, if you go from between 1945 and now, there have been ups and downs in terms of discussion and willingness to negotiate and conflict resolution efforts and
Mhm.
all these sort of security protections that are potentially available. Um, some of these are not in play right now, such that states aren't speaking as they were to each other. As Tariq was saying, you know the the start might be continued in terms of numbers, but not in terms of red phones or the communication systems. And these are critical, right? Because if you don't know what the other guy knows, then you're putting yourself at risk. And this is one of the things that Canada actually did raise at the first committee, which was
Mhm.
the current circumstances are bad, but don't think that you should just throw up your arms in despair. That we really need to double down and take things more seriously. Now, whether Canada is taking things seriously enough, that's certainly open for debate. But I'm glad they actually made the statement that we should redouble our efforts and
Well,
not fool around.
certainly true, but if they were to, if Canada were to double down, how would we do it? Through NATO, I presume. You don't really make any big decisions at the UN itself, or maybe we do, Tariq, and I've not been aware of that.
I wanted to build on where Robin ended. So, as you mentioned, Meta, the numbers for the time being are roughly stable because of the New START treaty. But the two sides are not talking to each other, and they have not been talking to each other now for 3 years. In the past, every time they would sign on one treaty, they would already start discussing the next treaty. So there was this ongoing interaction between Moscow and Washington as to what they were doing. There were on-site inspections and verification. Now, all of that has stopped. All we can rely on are announcements made by the leaders or military personnel from either side, and what each side can determine using their space-based satellites. We call them national technical means, so we don't call them spying. This is legitimate. So under Obama, $1 trillion modernization was launched, and that modernization in the US is just now beginning to pick up speed. So they will replace all of their land-based ballistic missiles with a new missile. They are building a new strategic bomber. Some of those already exist. They also want to build new submarines and new ballistic missiles for those submarines. So this will take the next 10 or 15 years. But there are also some reversals. In the past, both sides agreed not to have nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missiles and not to have nuclear-armed air-launched cruise missiles. Now it seems that the Russians already have a nuclear-armed cruise missile, which is also powered by a nuclear reactor, so to speak. And there is a lot of pressure in the US to also have a new air-launched cruise missile. So this is a reversal of where we were in the past. And then China is also building up. They feel that because the United States is now planning to deploy the so-called Golden Dome, which is a big issue in Canada because it also will affect us, they feel that their small arsenal will be vulnerable to an American first strike, where the Americans could hit them and then defend against whatever might be left. So the Chinese want to build up to the number of about 1,500 nuclear warheads by the year 2030. This is according to US intelligence, because China really doesn't tell us what they are doing, and their argument is we are smaller and weaker, and therefore we cannot afford to be too transparent. The United Kingdom was going to reduce its nuclear warheads below 200 and 200, and now they've decided to go back up to 250. So they're not going to build any new ones, but the ones they were going to retire, they are not going to retire those warheads.
Now, wait a minute, weren't the British warheads all on submarines?
Yes, the British warheads are on submarine-launched ballistic missiles.
Which is, my impression is that if you have a few submarines with ICBMs, you don't need anything else. Because they can't, you can hide them until you need to use them, and they can't help you out.
That's one argument for why vulnerability from land-based and even aircraft-based is superseded if you've got submarines. I mean, I don't know whether they're entirely undetectable, but they're certainly less detectable. So I guess that's the gold standard from that point of view. Go ahead, Tariq.
No, go ahead, finish, Robin.
No, mine it's a different line of subject.
Well, there is now a very active debate whether the oceans are becoming transparent using artificial intelligence. So there are some in the navies who firmly argue that no, oceans will never become fully transparent, and it is possible to hide in the oceans.
Mhm.
In between the layers where the waters are at a different temperature, this is called thermocline. And there are others who could say that you can spot submarines from space. So for us lay people, we really don't know what the truth is. The other advantage for keeping bombers is that the bombers can be called back.
Hmm.
Once a missile is launched, it's not going to be called back. And the military, all militaries thus far have opposed putting self-destruct mechanisms in them. So if a missile were fired by accident, you could destroy it in mid-flight, so it wouldn't reach its target. But the militaries are afraid that the enemy might penetrate their system and destroy their missiles. So one can get rid of the land-based ballistic missiles because these are sitting ducks, and the terminology is use them or lose them, because there would be a pressure for me to fire off my land-based missiles before they are hit by my enemy. So as soon as I detect that there is a launch from the enemy side, I have pressure on me to launch my land-based missiles so that the incoming warheads of my enemy will land on empty holes where the missiles once were. But we've had more than 60 instances of false warnings during the Cold War. You know, a flight of geese was mistaken to be a flight of missiles. The rising moon was interpreted as being an attack. And the Soviets and the Russians have always had a gap in their missile early warning systems. Even now, they have a gap. The U.S. is has very good systems, land-based radars, radars in our north, in the Canadian north, and space-based ones. But the Russians still have gaps. So the concern is that they would be more jittery and more prone to panic if their systems give them false warnings that they would feel that they have to use their weapons or lose them. That is why it's important, as Robin was mentioning earlier, for these channels of communication to remain open. The two sides talk to each other, what they are doing, and try to drive down the tensions instead of stirring them up further.
Mhm. Well, it's interesting that we started off this conversation with the idea of talking about what kinds of negotiations and things are going on toward building peace in the United Nations at the General Assembly, and we immediately dived into this very special area of the nuclear weapons threat. And I guess we need to go back and say, why is it that the UN is impotent? If the General Assembly can't, I presume that you only talk about this because the General Assembly didn't succeed, and even maybe it didn't even try to make any progress with disarmament or even arms control. So we need to think in terms of what is the meaning of that? Why is the United Nations unable to make any progress on this extremely important issue?
Well, Meta, these organizations can only do what their member states allow them to do. They themselves do not have any power. The
Yeah.
General Assembly can only adopt a resolution, and if countries don't want to act on it, there's nothing that the General Assembly can do. So the first committee and the General Assembly basically make recommendations in these resolutions. And the treaties are negotiated in Geneva, which is where the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was negotiated, the Biological Weapons Treaty, the Chemical Weapons Treaty, the Outer Space Treaty, and so on. But the Conference on Disarmament, which is in the UN system, the only multilateral negotiating body, that has not managed to agree on anything since 1996, when they agreed on the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And now, just a couple of weeks ago, President Trump announced that the United States should start testing again because he believed Russia and China and Pakistan and North Korea were testing, which is not correct. They are not testing. Unfortunately, in the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, doing simulated explosions in the laboratory using surrogate materials is not prohibited because it cannot be verified. Using nuclear materials to generate minute yields is prohibited. But this is very difficult because this is done in underground laboratories and one cannot really verify. So this century, the only country that has tested is North Korea. But if the US were to restart testing, then very soon India, China, Russia would follow suit, and then we would be back to the old days of nuclear testing. And this affects us in Canada as well. When there were atmospheric tests being carried out in Nevada and New Mexico, radioactive contamination crossed the border into Canada. But the official position of the two governments is that miraculously, the radioactive cloud stopped at the border and didn't cross over into Canada. And so there are people who are still suffering from this.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to Kazakhstan, where there are, horrible living examples
Mm-hmm.
of human beings who were affected when they were in the womb. They don't have arms, they have jelly bones. There are fetuses in jars of formaldehyde that are more horrific than any horror movie that anyone might have seen. So there are these living examples of the costs of nuclear weapons and nuclear testing, the cost of nuclear deterrence that we sanitize in our discussions. And so I was very disappointed that Austria sponsored a resolution at the General Assembly on New START, calling for new negotiations and maintaining the numerical limits. And they were joined by about 30 countries. But guess what? The maple leaf was missing. Canada did not co-sponsor that resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think it's because in their view, by co-sponsoring it, they would be supporting it. And in the current situation, they don't want to be seen to be doing it.
Yeah, it's sensitive times in the Canada-US relationship, and they're being extremely careful. So even though there was a reasonable statement at the first committee by Canada, there's still this, these things that they could have done, should have done, and didn't do, including within NATO and putting pressure on NATO to change some of its policies. So, there is that United Nations structural problems. Canadian Pugwash and some of the groups in Canada have supported consideration of movement of some of the discussions out of these consensus-based entities into the General Assembly so that you could get votes. But you still have the problem. You could pass a resolution, but it still wouldn't be acted upon, right? And so you have, because there has to be the political will to do that, and there's risks to going ahead when the major powers are opposed to you. And states, that's why we need these sort of coalitions of middle powers and so on to work together so that they can build some backbone. But
Oh, hold on. Let me explore that. What would a really effective middle power coalition be able to do at the outset? I mean, at the best that you could hope for.
you're asking me?
Yeah.
Well, you would start with statements, agreed statements on principles that probably already exist. You could work into sanctions. You could and sanction and you work together in trade and against those who are problematic states. But it's a global world, right? It's a global economy. Everybody is damaged in these things. So the point that I was leading to from this was, and this is what we discussed at the very beginning, is the importance of states talking either bilaterally or multilaterally amongst themselves to put pressure on those recalcitrant states that are doing damage, or to lean the populace within those states to, where they can have some influence, either in elections or otherwise. They might have to get into the streets to complain to their governance to that, what you're doing is wrong. There are things in the we're speaking almost entirely about the US in many cases, but it's not just the US where this is an issue. But in the US, you can at the moment, protest. And there are some signs of some movement because of discomfort by the executive there. But one of the things that the International Pugwash does is it has this two-track diplomacy mechanism where they gather players in states that are in conflict or see each other as enemies, and they sit them down and try to work through resolution methods. And how effective they are, it varies. I mean, there are examples where I think the one of the treaties was speeded up as a result of some influence back in the 80s, I guess. I'm trying to remember the name of it, the Test Ban Treaty, I think it was. Tariq would know, but and this was it wasn't exclusively a Pugwash project, but there were Pugwash people involved in it, and it became a reality that the two superpowers at the time grabbed onto. There's a book I just received it today, so I'm going to show you. This is the new book that just came out from Pugwash International.
Mhm.
And it looks at some of the examples of Syria, Pugwash in Israel, the Iran nuclear issues, and so on. Heavily conflicted scenarios where Pugwash, International Pugwash has gotten involved in the background to try and help resolve. But, sometimes what can happen is this is a civil society initiative. They can encourage state representatives to begin talking to each other. And if you look through the pictures, you'll see there are some state representatives in some of the pictures. And this can lead to good things. But it's as Tariq pointed out at the very beginning, this is what's missing right now in, for instance, the start, what would appear to be the start repeat,
Well,
which
now hold
is,
on, because during the Cold War, I think one of the things that Pugwash was given credit for was although there were no official negotiations on certain issues between the Soviets and the US, or maybe the whole NATO, I don't remember, but that Pugwash itself was a setting in which the people who might have been the negotiators from each side privately were able to meet, in Nova Scotia and have a cup of tea together. And whatever they did actually was they would go home with new recommendations for their government that actually made some difference. Now, I don't know whether things like that happen anymore. Uh, I haven't heard of anybody claiming that, but that would be sort of a backroom, unofficial negotiating setup
yeah.
that
I mean,
that
and it happens at the UN too in the corridors, right? But the book that I just showed you is about the 21st century efforts by Pugwash International doing this. So yeah, it is continuing. How effective it is, Afghanistan was another example. How effective it is, we don't know. But it's continuing, and it needs to continue. So I mean, these primarily scientists, physicists, and others
Mhm.
who are meeting with scientists, but arranging arrangements with officials through this conduit. And Tariq might have more to say about this because he's probably more aware
Mhm.
of it from the inside of International Pugwash.
Well, the contribution that Pugwash made during the Cold War was that it provided, as you said, a place where scientists from East and West could meet. And so there were like people like academician Velikov convinced Gorbachev that a nuclear war couldn't be won and mustn't be fought. And this is how that came about in the discussions in Geneva and Reykjavik between him and Reagan. You had the science advisor, John Holdren. But at that time, there was some room to listen to such experts. Today, there is no room to listen to Pugwash or other well-meaning civil society. As you know, we ourselves have trouble getting through to our own government in Ottawa. I mean, they are very polite. They give us a hearing, but I haven't seen any policy changes over the last 3 or 4 years. A
Mhm.
couple of years ago, when I went to with Doug Roach and others to Foreign Affairs, they listened to us very politely. and we would get one-line answers. We have no intentions of changing our policy. So at the international level, it's also the same. Um, there's nobody listening, and there is no space at the moment. And there have been well-meaning efforts outside the framework directly of the UN, but associated with it, like the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. None of the nuclear weapon countries have signed, nor have any of the allies, including Canada. Only 90 countries have signed, and there is a lot of pressure on those that have signed not to ratify, particularly the smaller ones. Here in Austria, they are constantly being badgered about this treaty because Austria played a key role along with 5 or 6 other core group countries, South Africa, Mexico, Ireland, Egypt, New Zealand, and so on, in bringing such a treaty about. So I think we are stuck in a time warp where we need to educate the public more, use the media more to put our message in an accessible format like this particular segment that you are recording, Meta, and thanks to all of your efforts in these hundreds of episodes that you have done so far and made available. So we in the civil society can keep chipping away at the edges, keep writing op-eds, keep trying to engage with officials, but if the officials are also scared, they don't see any career enhancement by sticking their neck out for arms control, which in today's environment is not the currency of the day. The currency of the day is remilitarization, putting more money into the military. The United Kingdom under Starmer is taking away heating benefits from pensioners in the winter. They have a 30 billion pound hole in their budget, yet they are buying new planes, submarines, new nuclear weapons. So all our priorities are skewed. And Canada is under a lot of pressure to 5%. And I'm glad that Prime Minister Carney has said they will meet the 5%. I don't know, in 5 years or 10 years. Hopefully by then, administration in Washington will have changed and more sanity might prevail. My last point on this is here at the IAEA and also at the UN, under the new American disposition, the US is opposing all resolutions that contain any language on gender, climate, sustainable development goals, and they want to strip it out. And they say, if you keep this in, any money that we are giving to your organization cannot be used for these particular purposes. So this very week, the IAEA's technical cooperation budget, which is helping developing countries in nuclear medicine and agriculture, is being negotiated, and it's stuck on these issues. Particularly,
well, okay, it looks like it's a simple answer. I hate to be simplistic about it, but what I'm hearing you say is governments are not going to do anything until public opinion forces them to. Their citizens demand it. Public opinion now is not thinking that way at all, but they're crazily lining up with right-wing bigots and dictators and other kinds of extreme right governments, not least of which is the US government. And therefore, don't hold your breath. We're not going to get anywhere. And the place to work has to be in changing public opinion, changing the political dynamic that's going to force governments to move in the direction that we hope will save us all. I mean, that's a simple analysis. Isn't that really what it comes down to, though?
Well, yeah, it does, and I embrace Tariq's analysis there. I think it's very realistic and disappointing in many ways.
Mhm.
But we all know that there's ups and downs historically, and we're at a low point right now for sure. But there are signs of it shifting. Um, I mean, some political corners have been uh, ahead of their game, or even distorted in their game, I would say. I'm not going to be too specific here, but I think it's contributed to the malaise, so that some of these the right-wing cranks, as you've noted, have gained some influence where they don't deserve to. But there's some indications that this has peaked, and it may be on the decline. And there's other indications that it's actually still rising in Europe, I would say in particular. But in the U.S., I don't know. There might be a sea change. One thing we were talking about this film that came out. This is where influence happens. I haven't looked at how many people are watching this film. It's amazing though how much, how many of us saw the day after. Actually, it didn't actually affect me that much the day after, but it affected a lot of people. It scared a lot of people, and they had a different look at things. There've been a number of films like that. There are some books that have that kind of influence. So in the culture sphere, I think it's extremely important that we see people stepping up there. And, why did this filmmaker make this film right now? The woman that made that film, she obviously thought it would make a good film, but she was committed to its coming to fruition, maybe for humanitarian reasons, in addition to her artistic reasons. So these NGOs that are still involved, and we in Canada, we've got a number of them. There's a statement coming out probably tomorrow or so from the Nuclear Disarmament 4 group that met on a roundtable back in October, and it covers these things. One of the big issues is this Golden Dome phenomenon that
Mhm.
is being pushed. There's a lot of opposition to that, a lot of concerned that not only its economic impact, but it's driving the arms race up because every time you build something new, the other side builds something to counteract it, let alone the feasibility of this thing working at all. Confusion as to, what this is compared to other mechanisms that are already in play. NORAD, for instance, is probably going to be modernized, not necessarily a bad thing if it's not being used in this way. But strategic missile defense, which is part of the Golden Dome, which is like has implications for space warfare and so on. These are highly problematic. People are not happy with this, but you can have a conversation about protection. And I kind of wonder whether Carney is being very careful in his language about the Golden Dome, but we don't know.
No.
So not only just one final point. Not only do we have to be consistently pressing onwards within civil society on these things, despite the bad situation we're in, but the leaders bend and they're ambiguous. And when they're ambiguous, it's for reasons that they know that some of these policies are unpopular. So
Mhm.
there's an upsurge on the edge potentially, and you never know when it can be released. And so we shouldn't be too pessimistic because that's not our role in this. We're here to build civil society so they can have influence on government officials.
I agree totally. And I want to go back to what you raised. And I'm so glad that you were the one who raised it rather than me, because I think I raised this. I have been in the background for years and years, trying to say that the real way of changing public opinion and political culture is through entertainment, through things like the House of Dynamite and the day after, and what was it, on the beach way back in the ages ago. All of these films, but I just had to break off a conversation with somebody else in order to start this Zoom conversation with you. And that conversation was with a woman who is writing and has finished writing a proposal for a series of TV dramas which would be about climate change. And she's got a love triangle and it would go on a whole season. And it's between a woman who's in love or has been pursued by a fossil fuel man executive and an environmental activist. And so the question is, which guy is she going to choose, among other things? and the drama is supposed to go on for a couple of years. And no doubt that is exactly the kind of a factor that will actually change public opinion, because when people become emotionally attached to characters and live vicariously through their experience, they change. That's how we do social learning. And so I'm going to have another conversation within a couple of days with a guy in Seattle who has an organization set up in which he's trying to build exactly that kind of um, production company making films. And I think nowadays we can make them for much cheaper than a professional TV company with union labor and so on. We can make our own homemade dramas. Right here in the building, I could have my follow them around with my camera and have people act, have my friends play the different parts and so on. And we could create a drama if I had good writers that would do the trick. And we know how to do it. We know what kind of scripts that we need and the technique for developing them and so on. So I am so hyped up on this. I'm really, that's where I want to put my energy is in the use of drama and fiction and emotional entertainment that will actually influence public opinion about not only, of course, we have the threat of nuclear weapons, but we have climate change. Now we have AI, which is just as big a threat.
The those who are expert in that field, they need to get cracking too. Like we here, the three of us, I don't think are experts in that field, but we have other expertise. And one of the links on the climate side is this is one of the extensive existential threats that are facing us. The money going into these militarized systems that are being developed is such poorly timed. I mean, it's never well timed, but the money that needs to go into resolving climate crisis through whatever mechanisms that are required now, whether it's geoengineering or otherwise, I'll just use the G word there, are going to require massive amounts of political will and capital. And the money being diverted into militarization, modernization of nuclear weapons, this Golden Dome stupid idea is going to be taken away from not only healthcare and education and social services, but from climate change mitigation and response. Very bad.
AI and AI. We need, don't
Yeah,
forget it.
yeah.
I think now we have three. To me, well, we always had Project Save the World had six issues that we think are existential threats, but AI has come up there very fast to be right, maybe the leading one. I don't know. So the most imminent one, I think, is just as likely and just as risky, if not so more so than nuclear threats. And boy, that's scary. And I don't know how to reach the people who have deep pockets and who understand how much they could contribute by making. Of course, then you've got to get people to watch it. And back in the 80s, when the day after appeared, you could get the biggest part of the American population to look at their TV set. Now, I don't think it's concentrated enough so that you can easily get that much attention focused on any one program. Although, if you boost it enough, you make some progress. And I guess today, House of Dynamite has done that to some extent, right?
Yeah, although I haven't seen the numbers of people who've watched it. I haven't seen its box office numbers. I don't know if Tariq's seen that or not.
Tariq, how about
Um,
in Europe? Are we talking about anything that resonates to anything you hear in Europe?
The House of Dynamite hasn't been talked about very much outside our community
Mhm.
that deals with nuclear weapons and security issues. I haven't come across anyone in any other field who brought it up that they've watched it. Here, it's more of a war hysteria, so to speak, in the media in Europe a lot. Defense spending, NATO, Russia war,
Mm,
Ukraine ceasefire. Um, the bills are coming to be paid now because the European countries subsidized a lot of sectors during COVID, nearly €1 trillion worth to keep people getting some money to take home, even though their place of employment was shut down because of COVID. And now with the military expenditures, even a neutral country like Austria is under a lot of pressure to up its military spending. It's being accused of being a free rider in the heart of Europe and so on. So, and
And
also this is
Austria is unaligned or neutral in
yeah,
its.
by constitution. And as Robin mentioned earlier in our discussion, that's why it's moving people more. The right wing parties are becoming more attractive. You know, the most popular party in the UK now is Farage,
mm,
the right wing guy. In Netherlands, it's also the right wing guy. So we have actually the right wing elements won the majority of the vote in Austria. So the more progressives had to coalesce to form a government.
mm,
Um, but this will happen in France soon because if the right wing is winning the votes and the others have to coalesce to keep them out of power.
mm.
So that's the trend over here, which is in the wrong
Well,
direction.
Jill Carr Harris and her husband Raja Gopal have been giving workshops in Europe for a month
Mhm.
until a week or two ago, and they are saying that what they hear there is much scarier than what they were hearing here in Canada throughout the summer, which is that most people that at the groups that they go to, and these are peace workshops and so on, these people are more panicky and really quite convinced that they're on the verge of war. Now, that would not be a nuclear war. It would be, and apparently the thing that's unnerving people has to do with the drones, because this is something that apparently Putin is sending drones, not to do any damage, but just to harass people into European countries now. And excuse me, my throat. But that this of course has made they've apparently had to shut down some airplanes and airports that couldn't have traffic for a day or two sometimes, and that this really has unnerved Europeans. Is that your experience, Tariq?
Yes, although some of these drone operators are local troublemakers, but some are their origins are ascribed to that coming from Russia. But you know, the Western side is doing the same thing to the Russians as well. So this is a tit for tat. There are really no innocent, completely innocent parties on either side. Both sides are provoking each other, and as Robin pointed out, or you pointed out, drone warfare is the next frontier.
Yeah.
Now very cheap, and one can do a lot of damage. You can take out a strategic bomber worth tens of millions of dollars with a $500 or $2,000 drone. This can threaten power plants, dams, critical infrastructure. And one can go buy a drone from the Walmart or a Radio Shack or some such thing for $200, $300 and make quite a nuisance of oneself. And
Not that Tariq is recommending this.
no,
Well, actually, no, that's not true. Our friend Walter Dorn, I remember even 10 years ago, he came to a meeting that I was chairing, and he had a pocket full of various gadgets. And one of them was a drone, which he flew around the room. You know, the auditorium was just, we were being buzzed by a drone even then. So I know he knows all kinds of things about drones that I have no aspiration to even learn. But our time is up, friends. And it's just, I don't know what I thought was going to happen in this conversation. I thought we were going to talk about the General Assembly meeting or something. But it's obvious that what we talked about is what needed to be talked about, because these are the real threats that we face, and some of the options that we should bear in mind, the possibilities that we've alluded to, although not with any much optimism about how much progress we're making. So do you guys have anything more to say before I shut this thing down?
Well, I hope we can do some more of these, and I think that's the long-term plan. And there's
Mhm.
a number of subject areas we can certainly address that
Yeah,
we can hopefully make interesting.
good.
Yeah, a
Tariq?
couple of days ago, I was rereading H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds,
Mhm,
and it's sort of coming about where we'll have war among machines rather than human beings, so to speak,
mhm.
which can be quite scary, depending how it
Well,
goes.
actually, I thought it would be fun. I'd like to sit in the bleachers and watch these two robots dueling with swords or laser beams or something, which nobody get hurt. But I'm afraid that's not how it's actually going to be run.
In the War of the Worlds, I think it was bacteria that killed the Martian robotons or something. I don't know how that would work, but I guess they were semi-robotic or something.
Well, the AI people, I believe, I don't remember whether it's Jeffrey Hinton or Joshua Bengio, but one of them is saying that the most serious threat that AI poses is that it becomes very feasible for any kind of nutcase who
Mhm.
wants to and who's a little bit familiar with viruses to create a virus, even inadvertently, that can wipe out humanity. And once it's released, it would be, COVID would be nothing in comparison to that. And that's his analysis of what is the most serious current risk of AI. Anyway, that's a whole different topic for another day. Thank you both. It's been fun, insofar as such as thing as this can be fun. And anyway, I always enjoy talking with you. Thanks a lot.